She lowered her head under the steam of a remote Icelandic hot spring on a cold afternoon in late September. 6 days later, a hospital in Reykjavík, a neurologist watched a microscope slide and saw something moving inside her cerebrospinal fluid. Organism had a name doctors rarely say out loud: Naegleria fowleri, the so-called brain-eating amoeba, smaller than the width of a human hair, swimming through liquid that should have been sterile. She was 29, a software engineer from Manchester. Third day of a honeymoon her friends had called the safest holiday on Earth. Before this video ends, you will learn 4 things. Why a 5-star resort cannot protect you from this amoeba. The single question the first 3 doctors never asked. The treatment that exists, and why it almost never arrives in time. And the cheap object in your suitcase that could have changed everything. To understand how it got behind her eyes, we go back 6 days to the water. 6 days before that scan, Hannah was a 29-year-old software engineer who had never been seriously ill in her life. She ran half marathons on weekends. She drank 2 liters of water a day. She read the safety section of every guidebook she bought, and she had bought 4 for this trip. According to people close to the couple who spoke later with local press, she had planned the Iceland honeymoon for almost 2 years. Her husband, Tom, was a primary school teacher. They had saved in a shared account labeled, half as a joke, the trip that fixes everything. They wanted glaciers, sand beaches, and the northern lights, and they wanted the hot springs, especially the hot springs. Imagine the scene: wooden cabin on the edge of a lava field, steam rising from a pool the color of pale milk, 2 robes folded on a bench, staff member in a navy fleece smiling and pointing at a small laminated card on the wall that listed shower rules, towel rules, sulfur warnings. Nothing on that card mentioned what might be living in the water. Nothing on any card in any resort in the country is required to. Guard this detail, 'cause it will matter later. The laminated card did not mention the nose. Day 1 of the honeymoon, they walked a glacier. Day 2, drove the south coast. On the morning of day 3, they arrived at a small, privately run thermal resort about 2 hours from the capital. 5-star rating, crystal clear water. A natural geothermal source feeding a pool kept, according to the brochure, at a steady 40 degrees Celsius. Warm enough to relax muscles after a day of hiking. Warm enough, also, for certain things to feel right at home. Brochure did not mention any of that. She slid into the pool around 3 in the afternoon. Tom took a photo of her from the edge, laughing. Her hair already damp. In the photo, her head is tilted back. Her nose is just below the surface. It was a second, maybe 2, the kind of small, weightless gesture you do 1,000 times in your life without thinking. She came up, wiped her face with both hands, asked Tom if he wanted to try the colder plunge pool next. Maybe you've done it too. In a pool, in a lake, in the sea on a summer afternoon. You dip your head, you blow water out of your nose, you laugh, you forget. Body does not warn you when something has entered it through the wrong door. Sources familiar with the resort later told reporters that the pool had never been tested for free-living microorganisms in any documented inspection. There is no Icelandic law requiring it. There is no international law requiring it. The water looked clean because it was clean of the things people test for. What no one tests for can sit in plain sight in pale milk blue water for years. That night, Hannah wrote in her travel journal that the water had smelled faintly of eggs and minerals, and that her sinuses felt strange, a little tight like the pressure before a flight. She thought it was the altitude change, or the sulfur, or just tiredness. She drank a glass of wine. She slept hard. Tom would later remember that she fell asleep mid-sentence, smiling. For the next 3 days, nothing happened. No fever, no pain. No sign at all that something had already begun moving, quietly, in a direction her body could not feel. First symptom arrived, and it did not look like what was actually wrong. Day 4. A headache behind the right eye, mild. Kind you blame on dehydration, on altitude, on the wine from 2 nights before. She took 2 ibuprofen with her breakfast and went on a glacier hike with Tom. By lunch, she said the headache had moved to the base of her skull. Dinner, she was rubbing her neck and asking for the heating to be turned up in the rental car. Day 5. Fever, 38.7 Celsius on the small digital thermometer Tom carried in his toiletry bag. She vomited once in the bathroom of a roadside cafe. The waitress brought her a glass of cold water and a slice of rye bread and said, "Careful English, that there was a flu going around the South Coast." Hannah laughed and thanked her. She believed it, so did Tom, so would you. They drove straight to a small clinic in a nearby town. The doctor on duty, a man in his late 50s who had practiced general medicine for 30 years, examined her for 9 minutes. He checked her ears, her throat, her glands. He noted the fever, he noted the stiff neck, and asked her to touch her chin to her chest, which she did with effort. He wrote, Icelandic, the words for Viron syndrome. He prescribed paracetamol and rest. He told them to come back if it got worse. This is the part that should not have happened. At that moment, according to what we now know about the disease timeline, trophozoites had already migrated along her olfactory nerves through the tiny perforations of the cribriform plate at the roof of her nasal cavity and into the olfactory bulbs of her brain. They were feeding. The doctor could not have seen them. He could not have suspected them. Nobody at that clinic had ever seen a case. Nobody in the country had, in living memory. Day 6 morning, she woke up confused. She asked Tom twice what city they were in. She could not remember the name of the resort from 3 days earlier. Her speech was slow, consonants soft, as if she were speaking through cotton. Tom drove her at speeds he later said he would not repeat to the nearest hospital in Reykjavík. The emergency physician this time was different. She was a 34-year-old internal medicine resident named Sigrún, who had spent 2 years training in London and had read, almost by accident, case report about a child in California who had swum in a thermal pool. She remembered one sentence from that report. She remembered it the way you remember a song you have not heard in years. She asked Tom one question nobody else had asked. Have you been in any natural hot water in the last week? He said yes. He said the name of the resort. He said the date, temperature, the duration. Sigrún wrote it down without looking up. Then she ordered, in the same breath, a lumbar puncture, an urgent MRI, phone call to the infectious disease consultant on home call. The lumbar puncture came back in under an hour. The cerebrospinal fluid, should be the color and clarity of mineral water, came back cloudy. The cell count, which should be under 5 white cells per microliter, came back at 2,400. Glucose was crashing. Protein was rising. Under the microscope, on a freshly stained slide, technician saw what she would later describe in the case notes as motile organisms with a single nucleus and a characteristic rounded pseudopod. Diagnosis written by hand on a yellow form at 4:17 in the afternoon was primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, PAM. Here comes the first of the things I promised you at the start. The species. Let me break this name apart, 'cause the name is the disease. Primary, from the Latin primus, meaning first or original, 'cause the infection arises in a previously healthy host with no underlying immune defect. Amoebic, from the Greek amoebae, meaning changed, 'cause the organism shifts shape between 3 forms across its life cycle. Meningoencephalitis, from the Greek meninx for membrane, cephalos for brain, and the suffix itis meaning inflammation. In plain terms, first-time infection by a shape-shifting organism that inflames both the protective layers of the brain and the brain itself. On the MRI, Inflammation showed up as bright, swollen tissue clustered around the front of her skull, exactly where the olfactory nerves enter the brain. The organism itself, Naegleria fowleri. Naegleria, named after Kurt Naegler, early 20th century researcher who first studied this family of amoebae. Fowleri, after Malcolm Fowler, Australian pathologist who in 1965 published the first description of human cases. In plain terms, a free-living, single-celled organism that normally eats bacteria in warm freshwater, but which, when it ends up inside a human nose, switches diet and begins consuming human neurons through a structure called an amoebastome. An amoebastome is, almost literally, a mouth made of cytoplasm. It extends from the surface of the amoeba and suctions off pieces of brain cell, one bite at a time. Medical term for this is trogocytosis, from the Greek trogo, meaning to gnaw. Remember this name? Trogocytosis. Amoeba does not poison the brain, it eats it. And here is the part of the story that the first three doctors could not have known without that one question. Naegleria fowleri does not enter through the mouth. You cannot get it from swallowing contaminated water. Does not pass from person to person. It enters almost exclusively through the nose. Once inside the nasal cavity, trophozoite form follows the olfactory nerve fibers up through the cribriform plate, thin bone at the roof of the nasal cavity, perforated with dozens of tiny holes for the nerves that give you your sense of smell. Those holes are its highway. The brain has no firewall against an organism that walks in through the architecture of smell. Now the numbers. Sigrun found in the international literature that the mortality rate of PAM exceeds 97%. In the United States, between 1962 and 2024, 167 cases were documented. Only 4 people survived. 4. In Iceland, according to public health records cited later in the case discussion, there had been 0 confirmed cases ever. Expected survival rate compared to bacterial meningitis treated promptly looks like this. Bacterial meningitis with antibiotics, around 85% survival. PAM, even with full treatment, around 3% survival. The difference is not a gap, it is a canyon. Here is what I need you to understand. The median time from symptom onset to death in documented cases is 5 days. Hannah had been symptomatic for 3. She had, statistically, 48 hours. The treatment regimen, one that had worked for the 12-year-old girl in Arkansas in 2013, was a 6-drug combination. Amphotericin B, antifungal so toxic to the kidneys that doctors sometimes call it amphoterrible, azithromycin, fluconazole, rifampin, dexamethasone, steroid to reduce the brain swelling, and miltefosine, an experimental drug originally developed for breast cancer, repurposed for leishmaniasis, granted orphan drug status for free-living amoeba infections in the United States in 2013. Miltefosine was the key, according to a New England Journal of Medicine case report from 1982, updated guidance published by the CDC in subsequent morbidity and mortality weekly reports. Miltefosine had been associated with 3 of the 4 documented United States survivors. There was, in Reykjavík, exactly 0 doses of miltefosine in the hospital pharmacy. The infectious disease consultant made 2 phone calls, one to the CDC Emergency Operations line in Atlanta, one to Profounda, the small Florida-based pharmaceutical company that holds the commercial supply of miltefosine in the United States. The drug, according to internal hospital notes later quoted in a medical journal summary, put on a chartered cargo flight within 4 hours. Iceland is, by air, 6 hours from the American East Coast. The clock by then was the only thing in the room moving as fast as the amoeba. The discharge of cerebrospinal fluid at the second tap, 12 hours after the first, did not mention the word recovery. It did not mention improvement. What it said, in clinical language, was that the cell count had risen. What it did not say was the obvious thing, that the treatment had not yet started, and the patient was still, hour by hour, losing brain. The family had 48 hours to decide whether to authorize an experimental protocol with a 1 in 30 chance of survival and a documented risk of permanent neurological damage, kidney failure, and death from the treatment itself. The drug arrived on a Tuesday morning at 6:40. Sigrun signed for it personally on the loading bay. Hannah was, by then, in an induced coma in the intensive care unit. Her body cooled to 33 degrees Celsius in a technique called therapeutic hypothermia, designed to slow brain swelling and buy the amoeba-killing drugs time to work. First dose of miltefosine went in through a central line at 7:15. The amphotericin B followed an hour later, dripped slowly because of the cardiotoxicity. Her kidneys, by the second day of treatment, began to fail. Her creatinine, normally under 1 milligram per deciliter, climbed to 4. Her potassium spiked. The team adjusted the dose, added fluids, held their breath. On day 3 of treatment, the second lumbar puncture showed the cell count beginning to drop from 2,400 to 1,100. Tom, who had not slept more than 90 minutes in any 24-hour stretch, cried in the corridor outside the ICU. The nurse later told a Reykjavík newspaper that he kept saying, quietly, he had taken the photo of her, with her nose in the water, that he had taken it, that he had been the one to suggest the pool. Maybe you'd carry that too. The small, impossible weight of a decision that was not a decision, made on a day that was not supposed to matter. On day 6 of treatment, Hannah opened her eyes. She did not speak. She tracked the nurse's hand across her field of vision. 2 days later, she said her husband's name. 3 days after that, she said her own. This is the part that should not have happened. The recovery, against 97% odds, against a disease that kills almost everyone it touches, was beginning. Here is the cold data that destroys the easy story. Of the 4 documented United States survivors before her, 1 suffered permanent severe brain damage attributed to a delayed start of treatment. 2 recovered fully because they had been diagnosed within hours, not days. The 4th, the boy treated several days after symptom onset, lived with lifelong cognitive deficits. Hannah's diagnosis had come on day 6 of infection. She was in the second category, leaning toward the third. And here is what would have happened if Sigrun had not asked the question. Within 24 hours, Hannah would have progressed to status seizures. Within 48, to brainstem herniation. Within 72, she would have been declared brain dead. Secht post-mortem would have found hemorrhagic necrosis of the frontal lobes, olfactory bulbs reduced to liquid, thousands of trophozoites in the meninges. That is the standard finding, is what nearly every PAM autopsy looks like. She left the hospital in a wheelchair 11 weeks after admission. She could walk short distances. She could read single sentences but not paragraphs. Her sense of smell was gone completely and, according to her neurologists, permanently. The olfactory bulbs, where the amoeba had entered, had been eaten away. Hannah was one of the lucky ones. The question that her survival forces into the open is this: if the best possible outcome still looks like this, what does that mean for the thousands of people who enter these waters every year? Without a Sigrun, without a Tuesday morning delivery, out anyone thinking to ask the right question at all. And Hannah is not alone. Naegleria fowleri has been documented in geothermal waters across at least 4 continents. A study cited in Environmental Microbiology journals found the organism in 34% of 185 samples taken from North American hot springs over an 8-year period, with the highest concentration, around 116 cells per liter, recorded in Wyoming, 3 popular Icelandic thermal springs have shown serious contamination in independent testing. No national requirement for monitoring. Globally, 381 cases have been reported across the medical literature. True number, given the diagnostic difficulty, is almost certainly higher. Compare 2 numbers. A natural thermal pool, properly tested and chlorinated, carries an estimated infection risk close to 0. The same pool, untested, in water above 30 degrees Celsius, bathers submerging their heads, carries a risk that, while statistically small, is fatal in more than 97% of confirmed cases. Gap between those 2 numbers is the entire public health story. Here is the actionable rule. If you swim, soak, or dive in any natural warm freshwater, especially geothermal springs, wear a nose clip or pinch your nose shut and keep your head above the surface. Amoeba cannot infect you through skin. It cannot infect you through your mouth. It needs your nose. In the first scene, a woman lowered her head under the steam of a hot spring on a cold afternoon in late September. She came back from that trip without her sense of smell, without the ability to read a full paragraph in one sitting, with the knowledge that she had become one of fewer than a dozen people in the recorded history of medicine to survive the disease that almost killed her. The water does not look like what is in it. The body does not warn you, it only keeps score. This is shocking medical cases,